Paul Revere's Ride. Quick reminder, Paul Revere was one of the riders on the horse that warned the colonists from the Battle of Lexington to Concord that the British were coming so that they were prepared to fight and not attacked at night when they weren't aware. Paul Revere's Ride by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, a poem of what happened. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or sea, from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church tower as a single light, one, if by land, two, if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm. Then he said good night, and with muffled oar silently rowed to the Charleston shore. Just as the moon rose over the bay, where swinging wide at her moorings lay the Somerset British man of war, a phantom ship with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar, and a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. Meanwhile, his friends through alley and street wanders and watches with eager ears till the silence around him he hears. The muster of men at the barrack door, the sound of arms and the tramp of feet, and the measured tread of the generades marching down in their boots on the shore. Then he climbed to the tower of the Old North Church by the wooden stairs with stealthy tread to the briefly chambered overhead, and startled the pigeons from their perch on the somber rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade. By the trembling ladder steep and tall to the highest window in the wall, where he paused to listen and look down, a moment on the roofs of the town, and the moonlight flowing over all. Beneath in the courtyard lay the dead, in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in the silence so deep and still, that he could hear, like a centennial's trade, the watchful night wind as it went, creeping along from tent to tent, and seeming to whisper, all is well. A moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour, and the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead. For suddenly all his thoughts are bent on a shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay. A line of black and bends and floats on the rising tide like a bridge of boats. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed at the landscape far and near, then impetuous stamped on earth and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower of the Old North Church, as it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and somber and still. And lo, as he looks on the belfry's height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to his saddle, his bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns, a hurry of hoofs in the village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles in passing a spark, struck out by steed flying fearless and fleet. That was all, and yet through the gloom and the light, the fate of the nation was writing that night. And the spark struck out by the steed in his flight, kindled and landed into flame with its heat. He has left the village and mounted the steep, and beneath him, tranquil and broad and deep, is the mystic meeting the ocean tides, and under the alders that skirt its edges, now soft on sand, now loud on ledges, is heard the tramp of his steed as he rides. It was 12 by the village clock when he crossed the bridge to Medford town. He heard the crowing of the crow and the barking of the farmer's dog that he felt damp in the river fog that rises from the sun, goes down. It was 1 by the village clock when he rode into Lexington, and he saw the glided weathercock swim in the moonlight as he passed, and the meeting house windows, blank and bare, gaze at him with a spectral glare. As if they already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge of Concord town, and he heard the bleating of the flock, and the twitter of birds among trees, and felt beneath the morning breeze, blowing over the meadows brown, and one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by the British musket ball. You know the rest in the books you've read, how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball from behind each fenced farmyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again, under the trees at the turn of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. So through that night rode Paul Revere, and so that the night went his cry of alarm, every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For born into the night wind of the past, through all the history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurried hoofbeats that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere.